Men are awesome, don't you think? Absolutely cute, they're sexy, they're handsome, they're everything in between. They come in a wide range of personalities. Everything from, how do I put it? From being the protectors, being the big daddy energy that is absolutely amazing and comfortable. Some are goal-oriented, career-driven. Some are more kick back, relaxed. Some are even very chill. Some of them are even itty-bitty little boys in their own right, and this is okay too. Because the thing about men is they come in all shapes, sizes, forms, in every single last variation that you can think of under the sun. Now, obviously, the aisle is definitely going to be split on this entire issue, and that's okay. Because if everybody was the same, regardless of, shape, size, personality, it'd be a little bit of a boring life. By the way, that is going to be the only defense that I'm going to give towards people who have a problem here. That's it. Okay, I get it. Women have been working on suffrage rights and all this kind of stuff in a man's world for not only 100 years or so, but for a hell of a lot longer than that. Women at this point have earned their rights, equalities, and everything under the sun. Hell, if you want to get right down to it, the biggest champions or people who are supporting the women's rights movement are men. So it's a little interesting that if the biggest champions for women's rights is men, that men, in some cases, is being criticized, demeaned, and discounted. Period. End of statement. In the same way that women have been fighting for their rights for over 100 years. Now, isn't that interesting? To make matters worse, when it comes to advocating for men's rights, even some women will go out, attack, and silence people, even women, who advocate for men's rights. Again, isn't this interesting? I started looking into men's rights because at one point I talked to a friend who was being criticized, demeaned, discounted because of how he was born and how he was raised. Not exactly something he could control. He was able to control it to a point because he decided that the way he was raised was not necessarily for him, but he was demonized because of how he was born and the dingle-dangle between his legs. And of course, all of this leads me to suspect and believe and think that if the issue is this entire thing, how can we boil it all down to something that is a little bit more bite-sized, easier to swallow? Still maybe a bitter pill to swallow, but how can we dumb this down into something a little bit more comprehensible? Something that the modern generation might actually understand, with their whole 60, 120, 180 second video news bite article things and BS. So here we go, something that you can easily understand. If you want respect, you must be willing to give it too. That right there is a two-way street. And a lot of you tend to forget that nice little notion. So, today's episode is more centered around men's rights and how men have a little bit more of the short end of the stick rather than having the big-ass stick that many women claim that they have. That is our topic for the day, so let's go ahead and get to it. Hello there! Welcome back to Trans Talks from the Fringes. I am Solstice, your hostess for the day. While I am not necessarily opposed to the trans community, they are amazing people. The community itself wasn't exactly around when I was undergoing my own transition in the first place. So a lot of the things that I have learned, come to understand, and work with was felt, and experienced from the Fringes. But if you happen to like this kind of content in this video, please watch it all the way through to the end. Give it a like if you like it. Be sure to leave a comment down below, and let's get right to this. issues that are at play here. There's no way for me not to be overly political on this entire subject, because all of it is centered around not only biology, reproductive biology, but also politics. And there's no way that I can get around at least the political aspect of this thing. I mean, just look out there. The Supreme Court has repealed Roe v. Wade, which gets rid of the privacy portion of reproductive health and women's bodily autonomy. Because of this, some red states have trigger laws that have been enacted since Roe v. Wade has been repealed, which makes it absolutely impossible, in some cases, for women to get necessary abortions when it comes to the life and health of the mother in cases of rape and all of these other things. In many different ways. It is horrible out there if you are a woman. But let's go ahead and let's look at an obscure piece of history real quick. After all, this episode is more focused around men's rights, not women's rights. All the way back in the deep dark days of yore, back when humanity was more in its tribal phase, and that whole thing. If we want to talk about women's rights, women had all the rights back then. Women were seen as absolutely powerful, not necessarily because I'm a woman, hear me roar, but because a woman was able to bear young, and every month they were able to bleed. Back in those days, a man would see this type of creature and think that she is all-powerful. They are all-powerful in their own rights, but how can they match that type of energy? So, the rites of passage were brought up, a method in which a boy turning into a man would be able to prove themselves just as capable, just as powerful, and just as necessary and relevant to the community as the woman is, and her right, her ability, and her power to give birth. These rites of passage were everything from going out there and doing something that'll ultimately benefit the community in one way, shape, or form. But the final trial, the final rite, would come something down to anything under the sun akin to an equivalency of a woman's ability to bleed every month. Up to and including pricking themselves so they would bleed in the exact same region as a woman would. Is it the same? No, it's not the same type of thing. However, the symbology is there, and as an artist in my own right, imitation is the highest form of flattery. A man wants to prove himself just as capable, just as powerful in their own right without having the same type of power, but they want to match that kind of energy to be seen as equals in the first place. Okay, let's fast forward back to today, because while tribal society is a fun topic in and of itself, let's talk about today's issues, and what happened all the way back in that day is not exactly relevant in all respects today. But while the ancient rites of passage are no longer relevant in today's day and age, there is some aspect that is still very much relevant in today's day and age that is not getting enough attention today. Women still have the power to give birth, and they still bleed every month to this day. It's a part of their biology. It's who they are, in some ways. Men still seek equality, to be seen as equals to this type of person and to match that same level of energy. Does it actually happen? No, not really. And if we're going to be talking about the political aspect of men and women, they're nowhere near the same. Back in the days of yore, when those rites of passage were necessary to prove that the man was just as capable and an equal to the energies of a woman, it was just that, a way for the young man to find a way to match the energy of the woman in their own right and become a productive and capable member of society, the brotherhood of men, and whatever else you want to call the culture of men. To this day, they're still trying to find a way to match that energy. But what happened all the way back in the day when it comes to men and the rites of passage and all that kind of stuff, because we're seeing history repeat as the pendulum swings in the opposite direction. At one point, because men were getting tired of trying to find a way to match that energy and failing in some way, shape, or form, they decided to just take power. That nice little tendency that many people claim is inherent to men happened at one point because of frustration, an inability to match that energy in the same way, or to be seen as equal all that time ago, is still being seen today in the recent gender wars. Only now we're seeing it on the opposite side of everything. Even though technically this still is a man's world, we have the difference between men and women, and it's gotten to the point where men and women see each other as different species, different races. The race of women, the race of men. And I don't see a point in that. Yes, the biological fact that women are capable of bearing young has not changed in the thousands of years. And yes, the fact that men plant the seed in the woman is a biological fact of men that has not changed in the thousands of years. What has changed is how we view this subject in the first place, and whether or not people are still even interested in matching the energies. Which is why the Supreme Court ruling over Roe versus Wade is such an important thing. You see, we've got this issue where men and women don't necessarily match energies with everybody anymore. Yes, women have the same rights and ability to go out there, find a job, and get a decent rate of pay as a man can. And they do so quite brilliantly. But thousands of years of male dominance in this world is not easily forgotten. Because right there we have seen the Supreme Court strip away the rights of women, and they're going to keep doing all that kind of stuff because dominance, the thing that we claim and accuse men of doing and being, is still being done today. Because this is the only way that men have figured that matching energies will happen. And if you think about it, it's kind of sad that some women are on that train too. But when it comes down to the basic Joe, Jimmy, the people on the street, the people that all of these people claim to fight political power for, are not fighting for. So what about basic Joe, Jimmy? What are they looking for? Well, quite simply put, you remember all the suffrage issues that women were looking for over 100 years ago? Bodily autonomy, the right to vote, the ability to have say in life, and all that kind of stuff. In many ways, it's the exact same thing. If you think about it, a man may not be able to give birth to a child, but he is necessary for the creation of the child. And then once all that happens, if a woman wants to get an abortion, or anything else regarding family law, the man has no say, and the courts are a little too easy to side with the woman, the mother, as opposed to the man, who is the other half of the equation. Instead of equality in the biological process of, reproductive and keeping the species alive, a woman will seek out this entire thing, and if they're not happy with the man after giving birth and all that kind of stuff, they can file for divorce, take everything that the man owns, in the worst case scenario, and run off with the child and pretty much the entire livelihood of the man, leaving the man nothing, emotionally damaged, emotionally distraught, and at their wits' end. They lost everything because the woman was tired. What's kind of unfair is, even in the legal system, the courts will more than likely side with the mother because of whatever reason they have. Now that the biological side is kind of done, men are more willing to unalive themselves than women, and that has everything to do with the societal pressures, the gender pressures that men undergo on a day-to-day basis. Think about that for a moment. Now, I will grant you here, this still very much is a man's world. If only for the fact that men are better heavy lifters, more capable in many ways of doing the hard labor-intensive work. The gender role aspect of being a man is you go out there, you get your education, you get yourself a decent paying job that pays well, You get yourself a girlfriend, a house, you get married to said girl, and you have yourself a child by the time you're 25. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't figured it out just yet, that is a societal norm. What isn't mentioned when it comes to this nice little societal norm is what it actually means and does to the male itself. Already, in some ways, the male is taught that they aren't exactly human, so there's no real reason to even try. Only able to really experience a few emotions along that spectrum. Oh, and they only really feel those few emotions out of frustration for not able to feel the rest of the spectrum without being criticized for it, without being seen as weak. The gender code, the gender roles, will go ahead and push and push and push and push and push that they are the pillars of society, that they have to be strong, they have to act tough, because anything else is seen as weakness. And if they are the foundations of society, the pillars of society, a weak pillar means the whole thing is going to crumble pretty darn fast. So don't be weak. Don't show emotions. Don't show anything that resembles the other people. Again, imagine what this does to the child growing into a man. Imagine what this does to the man as he goes out there and just attempts to live life. And these labor-intensive jobs aren't easy. It's called labor-intensive for a reason. And some of these jobs are more than labor-intensive. They can be hazardous to your health or to your life. And this is what we expect them to do. So, here's the thing. On two issues, we have some of the issues at play. On the one hand, when it comes to raising up the child, if the mother wants an abortion, well, it's her body, her choice. The man doesn't necessarily have any say because the energies aren't the same. When it comes to possibly the woman wanting to leave the man, she is sided with for custody of the child. Visitation rights, possibly laughable, depending on the courts, depending on the people. Then the father has to pay child support because, well, he helped bring the child into the world. And I guess that's the legal form of equality these days. But really, it all comes down to the man really doesn't have a say here. And some people are perfectly okay with this. The other issue at play here is that men are expected to be those pillars of society, have the education, have the job, have the pay, have the house, have the woman, have the child by the time they're 25. Then keep that house, that pay, that woman, that child throughout the entire life while essentially browbeating their own emotions into submission. And keep going after all of this. Now, interpersonal relationship will tell you that the woman wouldn't exactly listen to the man's issues, won't exactly give him room to cry, won't exactly give him room to be vulnerable. As modern feminism will have you believe, men are supposed to be seen as the stoic, upper-lipped lumberjacks. How can they be seen as strong and tough if they're on the floor weeping and bawling their eyes out, of course? Can I just say that I'd rather see a man bawling his eyes out on the floor as opposed to him possibly not being alive at some point because no one's giving him the space to be human? So here's the deal. On a basic level, when it comes to biology, men plant the seed. Granted, but we live in a day and age where most people are monogamous and will do anything for their family, for their children, and their chosen spouse. All men are asking for is an equal seat at the table. But at the beginning, at the end of the day, when it comes to the biological reproductive process of a human, men are just wanting equal say. That's it. No more, no less. When it comes to the societal standards and societal demands on the gender role of being a man, can we please relax that a little bit? Because it isn't just a man that is a pillar of society. A man can be a pillar of society if they so choose, but demanding that all men be the pillar of society in their society, to hold that stiff upper lip, to be the ever turning wheel that keeps everything in motion, and all these things foster more negative aspects of the man than it ultimately does good. In that emotional stiflation, a man is more willing to lash out in anger and frustration than a man who is able to express themselves more freely. So, can we please stop expecting them to be that stiff upper lip or anything like that? Because really, it diminishes the humanity aspect of the man. Men are expected to work very heavy and labor intensive jobs. So, using myself as an example, real quick. Back when I was that guy, I was the type of guy that was able to move mountains, and because I managed to do that once or twice, it was expected of me to do that all the time. Were some of these jobs that I worked on hazardous to my health? Yes, they were. And even some of them were hazardous to this lovely, lovely little thing we like to call life. As a man, I was already seen as defective because I have a low libido. I didn't exactly have a drive, so why? So I was seen as defective because I wasn't interested. I was already breaking the norms because I wasn't as active as some of my male friends were back in the day. So I was seen as non-productive. But I was a decent workhorse. And I was treated as a workhorse. And I did cave under the societal expectations that was pressed upon me. I was only supposed to experience a few emotions, but I was raised in a pacifistic household that was not healthy for that kind of mindset. So that made me even more frustrated because I didn't even have words to vent frustration. Plus, we still have the stigma today that has everything to do with I could seek out therapy. That means that I'm even more of a defective human, or a man seeking therapy is a defective human because they need help. At the beginning, at the end of the day, these are the expectations, some of the expectations that men face on a day-to-day basis. Now, some men do thrive in these conditions, but some men don't. Hence the reason why the unaliving rate is a lot higher for men than it is for women. I am all for men's rights because at the very basic level, men are one half of the equation for the continuation of the species. On one level, that's not in dispute here. What is in dispute is how it is done in the first place. And when it comes to that and the equality argument, all it really boils down to is men want a fair seat at the table of equality when it comes to family law. Men are more willing to work the heavy, labor-intensive jobs, the jobs that can be hazardous to the health, and all of these things. But we've also got a fair portion of society that already sees men as the workhorses, the labor horses, or the pack mules of society, and treat them as such. They're nothing more than the laborers. Nothing more, nothing less. There's also not exactly a decent support system for men having emotional issues. Now, granted, society already thinks that they shouldn't be feeling emotions in one way, shape, or form, or calls them weak if they start showing that they're upset, they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated, and they're trying to find a more positive and productive way to express themselves in something that isn't reminiscent of acting out, lashing out, or being violent. So they're looking for therapists, people that they can vent their frustrations to in a positive and an actual functional manner. But then there's the whole stigma of if a man has to find a therapist, they must not be all that strong in the first place. There's still the stigma of there must be something wrong, you must be broken if you need a therapist. I honestly find it interesting that the current evolution of feminism is looking for all of this equality in the workplace, in pay wages, and all of that kind of stuff. Just take a look around. There's nothing stopping these people from being the exact same type of workhorse that we expect men to be today. But when asked, they won't go for it because why should they? That's not what they're geared for. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for something else completely. And then turn right around and play the victim card, because by pointing out that they have every right and every ability to go out there and seek the same level of equality as a man, well, they have to be victims, now don't they? Now, on my own personal level, answering for myself right here, having lived both as a man in my own way and as a woman, as a transgender woman, I have to say, both sides don't exactly impress me. Far too willing is women able to criticize, demean, discount men simply for being human, simply for existing. Everything has to be their fault because our society demands that there has to be a scapegoat somewhere. And men just happen to be a decent one thanks to the thousands of years of oppression and a little bit of a god complex for thousands of years. Religion did not help in that respect. And then there's women. As I said in the beginning of this entire thing, if you want respect, you're gonna have to be willing to give out respect too. That just so happens to be a two-way street. Now, for clarification, I am talking mainly in respects to what I view and witness on social media, news outlets, news articles, and all of these things. And as we all know, news just happens to love broadcasting the negative side of everything, because the negative side of everything is what gets the ratings, it's what gets the attention. But as I said, recently I had witnessed an injustice with a friend of mine, a male friend, getting flack from a feminist who just accused him because he was a man. And I couldn't stand it. As I said in the beginning of this whole thing, respect is a two-way street.